The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog. It's where we all begin. Welcome to Lazy Dog Typewriters.
At the end of the Second World War, America was fully mobilized at the peak of its economic and wartime power. Many economists feared a massive recession as soldiers left the army and returned home. And while there was a short downturn immediately after the war, the American economy came roaring back to life like never before. In 2020, we find inspiration for the experiences of the greatest generation, and we'll look forward to our own economic rebirth in the near future, after defeating our own unexpected enemy. For now, let's take a closer look at an artifact from those early postwar years when America was regaining its footing after a costly, unexpected, but ultimately victorious war. The custom-painted Burgundy Red 1949 Smith Corona silent typewriter.
Howdy folks, as Kevin mentioned, we can look to our past to be inspired and to learn lessons, especially lessons of inspiration during difficult times. And that's what we're doing here with this machine right in front of you, a Smith Corona silent, made in 1949. And we'll just take an overall look at this machine because it is distinct and very different from what you normally see in these models, because we have custom painted this a burgundy red, which I think really matches well with the forest green, deep green keys and the brown spacebar. So let's go into this machine. This machine was produced in 1949. It was the first of the new Series 5 machines, the first year of production. And what had happened was during the Second World War, all typewriter production essentially ceased except for that used for the military. So all civilian typewriter production was canceled, and the companies were focused on armaments production, etc. And there's a number of cool posters that show that, mostly with Royal and other companies. We'll roll those in. But as soon as the war was over, there was a fear that there would be a massive economic recession, and there was, not massive necessarily, but a large recession that took place right after the war while all the soldiers demobilized and flooded back the workforce. But despite that brief period of darkness, the U.S. economy came roaring back. After they had defeated their foreign enemies, they returned home, and for the greatest generation, the next challenge was rebuilding America. And that's what they did, and these machines came about at that time and are emblematic of that period. So, Smith Corona introduced a Model 5 after producing the tail end of the Model 4 machines right after World War II up until 1949 when this machine was introduced. So let's go over. And now with Katie's help, we'll show you some of the features of this Smith Corona 5 Series silent typewriter. Let's give it a whirl, Katie. Alright, so you can see we've custom painted this. Let's continue on around. Katie was asking me what the 1, 2, 3 was earlier, and this is where your line selector is. So let's just look at that. 1, 2, 3. Thanks for pointing that out. The keyboard is not a full keyboard. This was not yet custom, standardized. The Silent Super, a little bit after this era, in the early 50s, had a full keyboard, meaning it had a dedicated number 1 exclamation mark. But this one did not, but that was considered standard. Interestingly enough, in the early years of this model, the 5 Series, you had two-tone colors, so a dark green keycaps here and a lighter green keycaps here. The tab, which we'll talk about more in a minute, is over here on the right, and the backspace is on the left, and that can throw you off sometimes when you're typing. So your ribbon color selector is over here. We've got a blue, a white, and a red, and we repainted that when we customized this. Another interesting thing about the keyboard that we look at, show that spacebar, Katie. That's right, it's more of a brown color than they used on later versions. I'm not sure why the change, but I kind of like it. And when you see one of those brown keyboards in conjunction, spacebars, I should say, in conjunction with these keycaps, you know that you're looking at a very early Smith Corona model. Another thing I noticed when I repainted this machine is, somewhat later in the 5 Series, this logo, which in this case is a metal attachment, it does not go through the ribbon cover is changed. And what happens is the Smith Corona logo at that point is actually cut, laser cut, or not laser cut at that time, but die cut, I guess, through the ribbon cover and pushes through. So if you're going to do some custom painting like we'd expected to, I had expected to push this logo out and through the back and just repaint everything. But turns out the earlier years, it seems, from 1949 or so, this is the metal attachment, I guess glued on, possibly welded on, but probably glued on. So it's just a little bit different, and there's no hole in the ribbon cover thing. So let's go ahead, go over the features really quick. Obviously, your carriage return arm is here on the left. We have our platen knobs. We have our line selector 1, 2, and 3 position. You have the freewheeling indicator right here. If you rotate that position, that lever, you can just freewheel. That's useful for making forms. We still have our paper fingers, as the earlier 3 and 4 models do. Those are effective, but can be a little clunky to get in the way. Those will get eliminated later on. And we have, again, on the right, our right and left, we have carriage release levers for moving your carriage. And the Silent has a quick release platen, which is a really nice feature. So if you'll come up here on the right hand side, you push down on this lever and you pull out on this knob, and you can remove your platen very easily. And that's a huge advantage that Smith Corona had, a great, wonderful feature. One other thing that most Smith Corona Series 5 machines have is something called a page gauge. And interestingly enough, in 1949, that feature had not yet been introduced, at least not at the Silent level. So that's just another interesting oddity. The page gauge would let you, it was marked off in 11, 10, 9, various increments. It told you how much paper you had remaining as you were typing. So it's neat that that's not quite there yet. In any case, let's talk about the tabs. So to activate the tabs, you come over here and you push the tab button. Let's see how that works. Can you push the tab for me, Katie? Boom. Okay, let's push it again, one more. All right, and let's do a third final time, all the way to the end. All right, so pretty straightforward, right? Well, how do you set the tab? There's no tab set and tab clear, as you might be looking. How would you possibly set the tab? Well, Katie, come on over here and show us. So let's open up the back of the machine by pulling down on that hatch. Thank you very much. And lo and behold, what do we have here? This is our actual tab rack, and this was very common in the early models, carrying over into the 40s and 50s. And here we have manually set tabs. Go ahead and pull one of those out, Katie. Pull up on it, yeah, and show it to us in the camera. There we go. So that little paperclip looking thing is your actual tab, and you came with a I think we have a full complement here, which looks to be about 4, 5, 6 of those. Sometimes they get lost in time. But what you would do is whenever you wanted to set a tab somewhere, you would just look at your ruler indications, which you might be able to see there, and you would slide one of those on. They can be a little tricky for small hands, but you just spin them around. Let's say we want to put them on a 30 or a 20. If that's where we want our tab to be. Just figure out where that is. Hard to do through the camera. And slide it on. Whew, we did it. Okay, and then your tab would be set there. So whenever you press the tab button, it slides and hits that stop. Let's do that action in reverse so we can see our tab function work. We'll hit a tab. Boom, this little arm comes out and intersects the tab physically. Tab again, it just blocks it. And then all the way at the end. That's how your tab works on these machines. Pretty neat. Let's try a little quick typing test. We set our margins back here by pressing and sliding these sliders. This is very common. We have a paper guide right here as well. And we just load up our paper. I put 2 sheets of paper, but the platen on this particular machine is still pretty soft, so we don't necessarily need to, but it's helpful. You'll see how you can adjust the paper fingers here, kind of to wherever you want, and they just hold the paper flat against the platen underneath the paper bale, which also helps with these rollers. So we'll slide it over and do our standard test. You can zoom in a little bit. All right, get you set up. The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. Now we have a black ribbon installed on this particular machine, so we can't see any other colors. But you'll see here that we have a nice elite typeface, so a small 12 character per inch typeface, and it's good to have some variety, but overall I probably prefer a pica typeface because it's a little bit easier for my old eyes to read at this point. The Series 5 Smith Corona Silent is an evolution. And let's go back in time a little bit, if we will, as we pan across. Beginning here with the square line, aka flat top, from 1935. Then we have a speed line standard from 1939. That would eventually turn into the clipper, all the way up into 1949. So 35, 39, 10 years later, 49, and we have the Smith Corona Silent represented here as well. So really, you can see the evolution. We go from a angular, flat, more curvy, and then a little more bulbous layout, which they stuck with for quite a number of years. And just as we round out our comparison of this machine or evaluation of this magnificent artifact, on the right is when we're done with them, and on the left is one that we started to work on. This is a sterling model, similar vintage, similar keys and features, less soundproofing at that time. But you can see this one's in a little rough shape, but you get an idea of a relatively drab shape. And this one was well on its way to being repainted and refurbished when we noticed one little hitch. And this sometimes happens when you're working on these machines. Right about here, there should be a little post, a little screw that helps the line advance mechanism. You see when the carriage return moves, it moves the carriage, but it also advances the platen. And that screw has gone missing. It's probably sheared off. It's a high stress point. You can see it over here, perhaps, dead center. That's what moves the line advance. So we're kind of stuck on repainting or fixing this one. You can see we've got it masked off for that reason. So if anybody's got one of those screws, let me know. I'll be glad to take it off. Let's go over some of the pros and cons of this fine Smith Corona 5 Series Silent typewriter. What's the pros, Kevin?
It's reliable as a Ford truck.
That's right. From a handyman's point of view or a user's point of view, this machine is just so simple and easy to use. They're very dependable, very little maintenance required, and when there is maintenance required, it's very straightforward to do. I don't always say easy because some things can be challenging, but as you see underneath here, zoom out a little bit, everything is accessible that you need to get to. You don't have strange set screws or locking nuts. You have very consistent screw sizes. It's very accessible. It's just a wonderful thing to work on, and it's a lot of fun. And it's just very reliable. It's maybe not the snazziest machine. It's not an Olympia. It's not necessarily an Erica from Germany or an Adler. But wow, they just got it right, like the cars of that era. Very easy to type on and move forward. What's another pro, Kevin?
So it's consistent. And it has a really easy touch.
That's right, easy touch. Touch is always hard to communicate through the screen, but when you touch this machine to type on it, you kind of figure it out. Some machines are very hard and snappy, and some are a little bit mushy. Even the vaunted Hermes 3000 is a little bit mushy to my taste. But the Smith Corona 5 Series really manages to just bridge the gap. It's not too harsh, it's not sluggish, it's just with comfortable keycaps. A very wonderful machine to type on, an outstanding first machine. Kevin, what's another pro?
It's widely available.
Widely available is right. Just like cars from the 40s or 50s, I guess, used to be widely available. It's just, you can't hardly look on anywhere on Craigslist or other online shopping places and find a wide variety of these. And what's the last pro, Kevin?
It's fully featured with a removable platen, tabs, and more.
Yeah, and more. So the removable platen may not sound much until you tried to remove one of the platens on the older Smith Coronas and even some of the competing models, and it's just an unnecessary hassle. Smith Corona really nailed it when they have this quickly removable platen. It's very easy to access, very easy to clean up your machine. So let's talk about some of the cons.
So, one con is there's no dedicated #1 key.
Yeah, and that's kind of more of a planned con than anything, because the Silent Super, we have three levels of products. So the Silent Super, or the top tier, and then the Sterling was the bottom tier, which replaced the Clipper. So you don't have the sound dampening that you have in the Silent Super, and you also don't have the dedicated #1 in the top line model, which is what the Silent Super was. Interestingly enough, as we mentioned, the Silent Super itself in the early year models also didn't have a dedicated #1, so that was a marketplace demand that was evolving. Even the top of the line Silent Super didn't have a dedicated #1. And of course, as we normally mention, not having a 1 is really no problem, because all you have to do is use a lowercase l to create the number 1 and the exclamation point. How do you make an exclamation point, Kevin?
As I've said in my previous videos, you really have to work for it if you want it. And if you want multiple ones, you are going to have a bad day. So you have to put a period. Now backspace. Then you have to do the asterisk.
Yeah, number 8, which would normally be the asterisk, but it's actually apostrophe in this early keyboard layout. So period, backspace, apostrophe gives you an exclamation point. And if you want 3 of them in a row and an emoji, then you got to work at it a little bit more than you might otherwise. Okay, so one of the other big cons, and we'll cut away to another machine here in just a second to really illustrate that, is that these early machines came in a brown that is somewhat drab, not olive drab military, but sort of boring a little bit, I think. And that really leads us to why we decided to customize this machine here and why we're really quite so fond of it. We think these color combinations really go together well. This burgundy paint scheme combined with the light green and dark green and the somewhat rare brown space bar, as well as kind of this interesting logo, which is all itself a little bit different because it's not pressed through the ribbon cover, but part of an attachment to the top. And then also these, as Kevin mentions, these awesome racing stripes, right? They all add visual interest. And they just, I don't know, they just really completed the job well when they built these machines. And we think by helping them out a little bit, 70 years later and adding some new paint, it produces a really, really wonderful and even inspirational machine that I could highly recommend to anybody. Anybody who has a brain, right, would love a Smith Corona Series 5 typewriter. Isn't that right, Kevin?
Yeah.
In our introduction, we talked about the Smith Corona 5 as an artifact of a different time that can be inspirational. And it really is an inspiration to us to remember in our current times that this nation has faced adversity in the past, economic uncertainty, and we came back with a vengeance, with a roaring powerhouse and engine that spread democracy and capitalism throughout the rest of the world, even though times were dark after the Second World War. And I think looking at these machines is a good reminder, a tangible physical reminder that we can all hold in our hands of what we're all capable of when we work together. And I hope you can be inspired by that as well. God bless.
Please like, subscribe, and share.